Thank you. Thank you for this encouraging applause. It's really my pleasure to be here. Also because right now there is student protest going on in the city of Amsterdam. Students have occupied the administrative buildings, the main buildings, and I welcome that. I'm happy about that, and I could give you 10 talks for my reasons to be happy about that, but I have to limit myself. So these students are now arguing that there should be more democratic relationships between the management and the students and the staff, because there are no democratic relationships. And currently, the protest movement is spreading to the other university cities. And I would like to add something to this movement. That is, that also as to the content of science, there should be more democracy. Why is that? Because science, much more than that it discovers reality, creates reality. And if we don't ask, if non-scientists don't ask, what are you creating for me, then reality will be created for them, but without them. And here's an easy example of how science can create reality via technology. Technology doesn't come from nothing. Some people design it for you, but often without us. Whereas technology not only extends our possibilities, but also changes our social relations. Due to the car, children can't play outside anymore. Due to birth control pills, which were a great advancement, I think, it's also the case that children are completely a choice. We don't get children anymore, we take them. And that creates a completely different relationship between parents and children. I was a crybaby when I was young. My parents simply put me in the shed, no problem. If you would be punished these days if you would do that. I'm fine. I'm not a crybaby anymore. There's new kinds of technologies these days that react directly to our brains, like antidepressants, but also like nanobots that are in the making to extend the neuronal network, to even make our brains bigger. So that's really impressive technology. But there are much more simple examples of science creating reality rather than simply discovering it. It's not only via technology that this happens, also via definitions, via verbal knowledge. Take this example. You've got a map here of poverty in the Netherlands. Well, what should be your first question? I would act as a teacher right now if I would ask you, raise your finger and give me an answer. So I'm going to give you my answer. My answer is your first question should be, what counted as poverty in this study? Because the definition that is behind the facts, behind the figures, is very, very important. You get completely different figures with different definitions. So researchers should be open about their definitions. Look, for instance, at the city of Groningen. It's in the red. Well, the first question should be, were the students counted in as poor? Then Groningen, of course, easily gets in the red. Or maybe for other cities, were the poor richest counted in? The people with the big houses who can't afford a mortgage anymore, or who can't drive their posh cars because they can't afford fuel. Do they count as poor or not? Here's another example, murder rates worldwide. You can be shocked about some countries, but you can also ask, what counts as murder? For instance, does this count as murder? Or some people say abortion is murder. Well, if abortion is murder, then we get a lot more murders than probably were counted in that study. And again, here's the definition with much consequences for people. Like the definition of poverty, the definition of murder is the murder figures and the poverty figures are translated into government policies. Hence, the definition behind the figures is of utmost importance. Why does this not count as murder? Well, because animals do not count as similar to us. If we would count them as similar to us, we couldn't eat them. We couldn't kill them. So in the definitions, there are always acts and values. Definitions have consequences. Here's a very important one. What counts as a mental disorder? This is an article by Nature. Nature published the figure of a third of the Europeans who suffer from a mental disorder, and they also call them brain disorders. And these figures come from the European Brain Council, which is, like much of science these days, not a neutral institution. It's a lobby organization for biotech companies and pharmaceutical companies and scientists. Precisely because there are definitions behind the figures, we should be wary of intermingling enterprise and research, but that's another topic. Mental disorders affect more than a third of Europeans. Of course, the first question should be, what counts as a mental disorder according to you? That was not in this article, so I kept on searching. Here's another article, also in Nature. $1 trillion brain drain. It cost the economy a lot of money. They counted as brain disorders not only tumors, traumatic brain injury, brain bleeding, etc. They also counted in headaches, sleeplessness, mood problems, anxieties, wrong personalities, etc. Well, in the end, everything counts as a brain disorder. Then 100% of the Europeans suffer from a brain disorder. Why is this, in this case, problematic? Because, as I said, the answer to the question, what counts as, has policy implications. And the Nuffield Council, which is an independent, financially independent organization, argued, if you do that, if you count everything as a brain disorder, then your answer to all the problems is brain technology. Whereas if people suffer and are unhappy, we can also think of other things, like poverty that makes them unhappy, or pressure at work. So the Nuffield Council warns against these figures and their implications. Now the question, what counts as, is important for the heart of science. It's much more basic than the actual counting. First, when you start a study, you have to answer the question. Afterwards, after you did your measurement, there's a lot of interpretation going on again. In between the process, there is the actual counting and the measurement, but there the question arises, what counts as good counting or measurement? Here again, there are lots of decisions need to be taken, and often they are being taken in a very sensible way, but they still are decisions, and scientists could be more open about it if the public allows them to be open about them. Example again, the testing of the safety and efficacy of drugs, in this case antidepressants. How to test that? Probably you think, well, this can be objectively tested, but they first need to be tested on animals. Now think of it, then you will need depressed rats or mice. How do you get a depressed rat? Well, what they do, what counts as depression in a rat, they breed 7 generations of rats that show little initiative, that aren't active. Hey, there's a definition of depression in here, showing not much activity. I'm not saying it's a wrong definition, but it is a definition. Now, subsequently, here is a firm that fascinates me. It's a firm, Cyanogen, that breeds these animals, and its slogan is, "We help you to discover life." And next it says, you can buy transgenic mice or rats from us. Discover? You're not discovering, you're making. You're creating nature. This is not a natural animal. You bred it, or even you use gene technology. So here, this is an example of science creating a reality rather than discovering it. Whereas they say, we help you discover life. Now the next question is, what counts as recovery from depression in a transgenic rat? Very fascinating question. I phoned the son of my friend, Anthony, at the time 12 years old. He has had transgenic rats in his bedroom because the white rats children have are not natural rats, are genetically transformed rats. And I said, Anthony, when are your rats happy? When do you think they are not depressed? He said, well, when they're sleeping together so pleasantly, I know they're happy then. I said, yeah, well, a good criterion. And we went on talking, and next we arrived both at the conclusion they could also be happy when they feel free to explore their environment. For instance, in a laboratory, which is not a natural environment, which is a created environment. But is this what the tests are about? No. The tests, one famous test, you can find it on YouTube, is the forced swim test. You can find many clips. The animal is put into water, and the computer measures how hard it struggles against drowning. And the harder it struggles, the better the antidepressant. So it also measures when it starts floating, etc., etc. So this is actually, it's a perseverance test. It's a resilience test. Here's another one. Not sleeping together, but they are separated. They hang on their tails, and the computer measures how hard they struggle against their fate. I'm not saying it's a wrong definition. A friend of mine who did this kind of research, he once said, she's criticizing my definition. I said, no, it's actually quite a good reflection of what counts as depression in our society. Not resilient enough, lacking perseverance. The old advertisement shows a woman who has been recovered from lacking perseverance because she starts to happily vacuum clean again. But the later advertisement also shows perseverance of a very different kind. The older woman had to accept her fate, and the pill helped her with that. And the later woman, she was depressed because she accepted her fate too much. She has to conquer her biology even. The latter one, the later one, is about the antidepressants become even a lifestyle drug because you can be a winner with it. And there's rain on it showing that you can vindicate nature. There's always rain in these advertisements. It's fascinating. Here's my last example of values being in the heart of scientific research. This one is an article in The Independent, and it's about an article in the scientific journal, the Journal of Neuroscience, and I checked it, and it's a good reflection of what is in the scientific journal. Brain scan promises to identify the hidden sufferers of autism. Autism could in the future be diagnosed in 15 minutes from a brain scan, saving patients and their families years of suffering from a condition that can go unrecognized for decades. Wait a minute, I worked in a child psychiatric clinic. The autistic children who were there were so noticeably different from other children. We used the word autism only for children that could be recognized as children with severe problems immediately. And here, autism has already become a thing that can go unrecognized for decades. This is a hidden change of definition. And I argue that scientific researchers should be open about their definitions. If they cover their definitions with layers of figures or even with pictures of brain scans, that only hides the definitions and does not make them go away. So I plead for democratic openness, I plead for open conversations, and in my field of study, more people use the expression of science on the Olympus, scientists telling defects, versus science on the agora. And on the agora, they invite people to think along with them, and they listen to the knowledge of other people. Just like we do this here in TED Talks, academics and non-academics are talking with one another and exchanging their special kinds of knowledge. So now back to my student in the Maagdenhuis in Amsterdam. when I was looking at this picture, I had so much mixed feelings, because I was happy about, you know, the fight for democracy, but I looked at the book he was reading. It's about psychopharmacology for children and adolescents. And I was thinking, my God, is he making sure that he learns all these facts in this book, and then he takes a multiple choice exam with A, B, C, only one right answer, the right answer? Whereas the issue of medicines, psychiatric drugs for children is such a complicated issue. And then later on, because he passed this multiple choice exam, he will think he's the one who's really knowledgeable about these issues. I hope he's not. I hope he's open for, he will become open for a more democratic view of science. Thank you very much. Thank you.